Good morning and welcome to the Seplat Petroleum Interim Results webinar. Throughout the webinar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, and afterwards there will be a question and answer session. Just to remind you, the webinar is being recorded. And today I am pleased to present Mr. Aburu, Chief Executive. Please begin your meeting, sir.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Thank you all. Nice to have you back for our half-year interim results announcement. I'll go quickly with the summary, and then thereafter the CEO Stuart will give you operational details, and CFO Roger will give you financial details. The main highlights of the first half of the year has been underpinned by operational efficiency. We've put in a lot of efforts to achieve operational efficiency and financial discipline. As you are aware, we've been confronted with two major lines of headwinds, the drop in oil prices, as well as a higher than expected period of downtime on our export pipeline. So against the backdrop of these two major headwinds, we had to institute measures to ensure operational efficiency and financial discipline, and also optimize our gas business. And you will see the results of these efforts beginning to show. And so our working interest production for the first half, in spite of the higher than expected downtime on the transfer came to 32,580 barrels equivalent per day. It's 19% higher year on year, and within the guidance range of 32,000 to 36,000 BOE per day. I'm happy to report that our new gas plant, the 150 million scope gas plant, is now being commissioned and operational. And as you see in some more details from the CEO, this has now led us to essentially double our gas production. So we're in a situation where we have higher volumes of gas production, better prices, and we're beginning to get into the era of more reliable payment schedules even for the gas. So our gas business is really come of age, come up to the what our predictions had been for the past 3 years. We've also made substantial progress in reducing our receivables. That this has really been the focus of activities in the past 3 months, because this has been a huge drag on our progress. Tied down a lot of money with NPDC. Two key things have now happened. We have reached some agreement to get slightly higher volumes allocated by an NPDC to their funding partners towards reducing over a 24-month period, taking out all the outstanding receivables. But even more critical than that, we have also reached executed an agreement with NNPC and NPDC to withhold their share of net gas revenues, again towards reducing and eventually eliminating the receivables. We're in the process of discussing actually putting even a revolver in place to add to all of these efforts. So you will begin to see for the first time a downward trend, a measurable downward trend in the receivables, and then we're hoping that by the end of the year this trend will continue, and the results will be a lot higher, more measurable. Revenues $248 million and profit after tax of $34 million. This reflects the two key headwinds I spoke about: the drop in prices and the higher than expected downtime on the export pipeline. And also, the first quarter of the year still had part of the drag of the 2014 work program, and so it took almost to the end of the first quarter before most of the measures in cutting costs, both Capex and OPEX, which we put in place at the end of last year, actually started taking effect at the end of Q1. So you will still see a little bit of drag in expenditure the first quarter. But overall, where we are is, as I said at the beginning, the efficiency measures we put in place and financial discipline that we put in place, and the deliberate actions to reduce the receivables is such that our performance today indicates that we're definitely and in a measurable manner coming out of the bottom curve and heading up going forward. Just a little bit more emphasis on the gas business. It's not just have we been able to increase double production. We're still in a case where the demand for gas, particularly within our area of operation, is actually much higher than what can be supplied. So we're in a good position. Increase our capacity to process, our capacity to deliver gas into the domestic market at a time the demand is it's very high and the pricing is getting. We've moved from 70 cents to $1, $1.50. Now we're between $2.50 and $3.50 average price per thousand. So really, we again going forward from where we are now, you will start seeing the full impact of our gas business and improved gas business on our bottom line. Just finally to show that delivery map that you see there underpins how critical our location is on the domestic gas business in the west of the Niger Delta. The asset which we currently operate sits right at the hub of the main delivery trunk line for gas into the domestic market in the west. And this is really what makes our location a very key demand hub. And some other assets that are brought in with additional gas reserves, the OML 283, the pillar asset has about 200 BCF. Our current assets about 1.9 TCF. And as I've always said, OML 53, one of the major attractions is that it has 1.5 TCF of gas, which you can connect up to the OBOB pipeline and deliver gas to Oben for export. So again, going forward, it's a lot of emphasis on our domestic gas business because it's going to start showing exactly what we promised 2-3 years ago, a substantial part of our bottom line going forward. So those are the highlights, and then so I'll let Stuart now go into more details on the operations.
Good morning, Stuart Connell. I'll talk to you about the first 6 months of the business from an operational perspective. The production up by 19% at 32,580 BOE equivalent. This reflects the increased contribution from our gas business and for the first time production from OMLs 53 and 55, which have been contributing since the beginning of January. This has been achieved despite some 43% downtime on the evacuation system, particularly the Focadis lines. Our western assets peaked production at around 84,000 and 284 million scuffs per day in June. Our 2015 production guidance remains as previously stated at between 32 and 36,000 barrels per day. Moving on to gas. Our existing gas facilities at Oben had a capacity of 90 million scuffs per day, and we looked at back in 2012 we looked at a two-phase expansion program. The first phase was to add an additional 150 million scuffs to bring our capacity at Oben to 240, which is now being completed, and the second phase to add an additional 225 million capacity at Oben, which will be contracted and awarded later this year. First phase completed, 2 new 75 million scuff modules have been added and commissioned. From installation to commissioning took about 5 months, and the plant started to produce gas from April this year. During the periods of shutdown, we were able to carry on producing gas into the market with the installation of a temporary condensate tanks farm at Oben, which enabled us to produce up to 100 million scuffs per day into the market, even though our primary export route for condensate was blocked via the Trans-Focadis. Our gas business, if you look I'm on slide 10 now, in the bottom right hand corner we have the capacity diagram and the contract diagram. The 60 million in the bottom represents the processing capacity of our Seplat plants, where we have contracted 50 million scuffs to the Seplat power plant, Euro-Afrique, on a 10-year contract. Above that, we have the 90 million scuffs, which is the original capacity of the Oban plant, which is contracted to the Gregor Power Station. You can see these on the left-hand side, again on a 10-year contract for a supply of 80 million scuffs. For the last few months, Gregor has been taking about 40 million scuffs per day, and we've been able to offset that for the additional 40 into a new contract that we have with NGC for a 2-year firm contract for 100 million scuffs per day and up to 100 million on a variable contract. Moving up again, we have the 150 million scuff which has been installed and commissioned, and phase 2 is an additional 225 million which will be installed before 2017. 2018 we have the new gas to power projects, which are the Azura power plant and one other which we can't name at this time. We'll be taking gas. Azura will take 116 million from the 1st of January 2018, and the other will take 90 million from the 1st of January 2018. So overall, we have a robust gas business with the gas fully contracted. Just a bit now in our capital projects update. On the drilling, as Austin mentioned, we had some carryover work from last year. We've completed the first 6 months, 4 gas wells, 6 new wells in total, 2 oil wells and 1 workover, and we're currently working on 2 Seplat shallow wells. The storage tanks at Amukti are nearing completion. Both tanks are at hydrotest stage and should be operational in Q3. The Oban associated gas compression project, which you can see in the upper left, the large grey modules are the 3 big compressors. We're 100% redundancy there, so we would expect that from Q3 we'll start to see between 10 and 12 million scuffs of gas being exported into the market to Oban. So quick update on the work schedule for the drilling schedule. We're currently on target at the end of July. We're working on Seplat 31 and 32. Both wells have been drilled from the same pad, so we've been able to achieve some significant cost savings here, and we're able to reduce the time, and after Seplat 31 and 32, it leaves us with 1 other Seplat well to do to complete this year's work programme. Thank you. With that, I'll hand you over to Roger.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Just running through some of the financials here. Looking through our summary of our H1 performance, revenues are all down 36% compared to the H1 2014. Through that, largely to do with the oil price decrease of some 52% on that, from 112 a barrel to 53. That sort of masks some of the increases we're seeing in sales there, and also impact of downtime coming in through there. And we had 77 days in the first half compared to 45 days in H1 last year. Cost of sales were the one-off crude handling charge went through this year at 25 million, which has pushed that up a bit, but that's generally the trending down of costs. If I run into the G&A numbers, you're starting to see some savings coming through here in G&A cost savings. I mean, last year we had a number of one-offs in there, so H1 2014 slightly higher than would be run, but looking at G&A, we're seeing some of the cost savings from cost reductions, some $7 million of savings in travel and staff and other costs. And then you see operating profit there of 71 versus 173, so 39% decrease there, and a profit after tax of 34 versus 156. In there you're seeing some higher interest costs coming through, which is impacting the profit after tax. Capex, this is Capex incurred, and so we've incurred 68 million. We've got a slide in this further on the pack, but we're starting to see reductions in Capex from the predominantly from the rigs being operated. And cash flow before working capital is 92 versus 180 last year. So it's the reductions there, but ahead of Capex spend. Gross debt has gone up to 963 versus 628 in H1 last year, predominantly because we drew down on the new facilities to pay for the Chevron assets, and so you're seeing that increasing there, and then cash and deposits for investment. If we turn to the next slide, we've just plotted the cash flow movements in the 6 months. And you can see there that obviously the $368 million is coming in from proceeds from borrowings. There you see the funds from operations. Working capital movement still we see some level of funding of the NPDC. But as we said earlier on, we've got plans in place to rectify that. Capex spend was 38. We committed 68, but we actually just spent 38 in the 6 months. Some loan repayments, and then you can see the acquisition of the far right here at 371. Stripping out the deposit investment, we actually had a cash at the 30th of June of 2015. And obviously subsequent to the year end, so the half year, we've now released some $368 million back out of escrow, and is now sitting in cash. So the cash numbers are higher today. Next slide, looking at some of the Capex. You can see clearly we've plotted the last couple of years of Capex spend, and you can see now the trending down. So for this year, we're 68 million in the first half. It's about 40% of the 168 million guidance. And that's predominantly, you can see the reduction there in drilling costs. So we spent $42 million of drilling when we drilled about 7 or 8 wells so far. But last year was more than double that number. So looking at the last year's full year spend was 321, and we expect that to be roughly half that this year. We obviously completed some of engineering, and obviously the gas plant is now fully up and running. If you turn on to the next slide, as often said, we've been doing a lot of work here to try and work with our partner to reduce the receivables balance. It's not an issue that we are suffering alone here, but it's something that we are working hard with. And so we started off with 462 in the start of this year. 68 million we received, and we had 167 million of our spend. So the headline receivable was 561, but against that, we've got agreement in place now to offset the gas revenues, and they're coming in more significant numbers. So we expect that to be improving. But we set off some of those, and then some crude handling charges we held. So the net receivable reported in the numbers of 504. Let's talk a little bit about what we've agreed with NPDC. So we have a signed letter with them to offset those gas revenues and also to work towards a JV loan. We're just now engaging with some lenders to put that in place. And as said earlier, NPDC is allocating more oil, to its partner at the minute, and also to address this JV loan. If I go on to the next slide, we talked about this in the last Q1, but basically we refinanced the debt facilities. We have now $1 billion of debt in one 7-year and one 3-year facility. The 7-year facility can be expanded, and that's what we call the accordion facility. LIBOR plus 8.75 is a coupon on the 7-year, and LIBOR plus 6 on the 3-year. Basis, we're moving towards trending down on the cost of borrowing, and we will continue to work with that. To address the oil price we put in place at the end of Q1, or in April, we put a 4.4 million barrel hedge in place, and that's going to do us to the end of 2015 at a strike price of $52 a barrel. We will continue to look at hedging in beyond 15 on a dynamic process as to manage that price risk going forward. So I turn into the last slide, just to sum it up in terms of summary. We've strengthened the balance sheet by the debt facilities are in place. We have released $368 million out of escrow post period end, and we reinstate that now in the cash that sits in our bank. We have an agreement in place with our MPDC partner to offset the gas revenues, but also to put in some JV loan, which is really there to predominantly retire some of the 2015 balance, but really it's for the future in terms of cash calls, so we don't run up the balance. And finally there we have a number of cost reduction initiatives underway. They're starting to come through, and you're starting to see some reductions in OPEX, and also Capex is reducing accordingly. Okay, so if I hand back to Austin to wrap up.
So again, I summarized by emphasizing that internally 2015 we determined that 2015 is a year of survival the headwinds that have been imposed on us, putting all the structural features, the operational features, features of financial discipline that will not only see us through the headwinds, but actually position us to then operate a lot more efficiently going forward, bringing additional revenues from gas. Not just optimize production, but optimize profit from production, so that going forward, I think it's looking a lot more sunny going forward than we have seen in the past 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you wish to ask a question, please press 0 followed by the 1 on your telephone keypad. If you wish to withdraw your request, you may do so by pressing 0 and then 2 to cancel. Once again, to ask a question, please press 0 followed by the 1 on your telephone keypad. There will now be a brief pause whilst your questions are being registered. And the first question comes from Al Stanton from RBC. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Yes, good morning, folks. In today's release, there's quite a commentary how you've been in alignment with the Pioneer tax and how you've fulfilled your obligations for the first 3 years. I was wondering how the story evolves now for the remaining 2 years of the program.
Yes, on Pioneer tax, as you said rightly, we had been notified at the beginning of the year of a change in that schedule, splitting the 5-year tenure into 3 years, which we run out at the end of this year, and the second 2 years. The second 2 years remain a moderate risk for us. We will apply because we think we're qualified, given all the substantial investments in gas, domestic gas supply, not just investments, but actually delivering volumes now into the domestic market. So at the end of Q3, we will apply for a 2-year extension. Now, we cannot give, especially now we're just also seeing a change in regime, so we can't give a full assurance that we'll get it. But we will apply, and we think we qualify to get it. Now, even outside of that, if you strip out just our gas business alone on a standalone basis, actually fully qualifies for its own Pioneer tax going forward. So we still have options. We have options going forward to get some tax benefits for all the investments we made in the gas business.
Thank you.
The following question comes from Ildar Davlet-Sahin from Renaissance Capital. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions, please. So, in fact, 3. So, question number 1 on the downtime. So you've been running it at a relatively high rate for the first 6 months, and if we extrapolate that trend for the full year, it looks like you may exceed your original guidance of up to 80 days downtime. It could be more like 100. Do you see any reasons why second half could be better in terms of the downtime? Do you take any measures to reduce the downtime? That's the first question. Second, on Capex, I saw you have 2 different numbers on your financial account. It's $38 million. In the presentation on the separate slide, you had $68 million. So I wonder, is the difference due to composition? So you may have other investments which you classify as Capex, or is it due to just timing? So you spend in one period and you recognize in the second. And the third question is on M&A for the investment, the deposit for investment. So it seems like in the account you say that you restarted negotiations. So can you just provide more color on where you are on this process, and when should we expect more clarity on the deposit and the future M&A? Thank you.
Okay, so let me quickly take the first two, the first and the third, and Roger will address the Capex question. We're more bullish on the second half downtime, and the reason is, if you look at between November and the end of April, really up to the end of May, the first part of that period is coming up to the elections with all the hangovers and anticipation coming into the elections. Then the elections themselves, the elections held, and then a change in government. So that was the whole 6-7 month period of grave uncertainty. And we think that also partly accounts for the extremely high downtime that we had on the transfer cards. Going forward, and looking at now, 28 days after the end of the first half, it's looking a lot better. So we think really that for the rest of the year, we're certainly not going to get 76 days of downtime as we had in the first half. Could we possibly exceed 80 days full year? Possible, maybe not by a lot. We'll hope that it stays within 80 days and then gives us a much better second half results. The deposit for investment, what has happened is that a window was thrown open for further negotiations for possible reclaim of the area that we're making investment in. But what was most important from point of view of our CFO was, first of all, to minimize our risk by having most of our cash in hand while those negotiations are ongoing. So that's exactly what we achieved by taking the cash out of escrow, and so our CFO holds that cash while the negotiations are ongoing. In terms of timing, we think that things should unravel in the next few weeks to the point where we should be able to make a definitive announcement in the next few weeks. I will take the Capex question.
So on your Capex question, it's absolutely, it's under accrual. So the 38 million is a cash number, and the 68 million is actually accrual. So that's what's been spent. The difference between the two is the timing.
Right, thank you. And maybe just on the Capex, do you see any opportunity for that your actual spending will turn out to be lower than the original guidance? I saw you restated the guidance of 168, but it could be lower, or you still think you will catch up in the second half?
I think we're holding guidance at 168. We continue to monitor this depending where oil prices, etc. We've got our Capex under in terms of reduction, that Capex under control, and so therefore we still maintain 168.
All right, thank you very much.
The next question comes from Michael Alsford from Citigroup. Please go ahead. It's open.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for taking my questions. I've just got a couple, please. Just firstly on the gas business, clearly some good progress in the first half on getting the additional capacity on stream at Oban. But I just wondered if you could give some sense as to what the forward sort of capital spend will be on that gas business to get you to your sort of 2017 target of 525 scuffs a day of gas capacity. That was my first question. And then just secondly, if you look at the receivable, obviously good steps made to try and address that, the MPDC receivable. Could you give us some view or some guidance as to where you might see that reaching at the end of the year in terms of reduction? That would be really helpful to get an understanding of the working capital inflow you're hoping for, based on, say, the current oil price environment and gas price environment. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, the gas Capex spend going forward. The good thing about our gas story is that the Capex spend to deliver the volumes that were projected were actually substantially front-loaded. So to go from 150 million scope extra processing capacity to 375 million scope processing capacity will cost us. So the extra 225 million scope will cost us less than half of what we spend to get the 150. Because the way we designed the plant is all the ancillary features already in place, and what we have left will be to plug in three extra modules at a much lower price. Actually, we're looking at what, 20 to 30 million dollars to give us that extra increase. So the capex spend going forward to deliver the volumes that we anticipate we should do by the end of 2017 is actually minimal compared to what we've spent so far. And year guidance for the receivables, I'll let Roger handle it.
Yeah, look, we're cautious in this, obviously, because where it's run to, etc. I think the way to think about it is that it's by putting in place this JV loan, and we're just starting discussions now with that. So I put a bit of prudence on that one. But part of that loan will be to manage the ongoing forward cash calls, and part of that loan will be to retire some old receivables. And it's roughly half and half. So that $300 million loan, roughly half will retire the past, and the half will deal with the future. So that'll give you some level of guidance on it. But I really urge caution in this thing, that we just want to make sure that it's working in the coming months.
And I think, essentially, it's, once we're in a position, which is what we're working on very fervently, to provide all the funds going forward and apply some revenues, even from gas, to retire some of the outstanding, then essentially what you see will be a downward trend. No matter how you look at it, it will be a downward trend that you'll be seeing now. Exactly what magnitude of downward trend is what we're being cautious about until we finalize all of this. But the intention is to hold forward funding at 100% and still have some revenues to retire part of the outstanding.
Okay, understood. Thanks very much for your answers.
The next question comes from Temi Esho from Renaissance Capital. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking this call. My first question is I just want you to explain crude handling charges, why there were deferrals in crude handling charges, and if this is a one-off or it's something we're going to expect in the future. My second question, which has been answered partially, is I just want to know how long the new gas agreement, how long it's going to take to actually reduce the receivable, and if NPDC will still be paying its receivables slowly, even with this agreement. Thank you.
Okay, let me take your second question first.
Okay.
Yes, the intention, even in spite of the gas revenues, again from what Roger explained, is actually for NPDC, the structures we are putting in place from oil revenues, for NPDC to not only be able to fund this expenditure going forward, but also be retiring slowly some of the outstandings. So the extra revenues from gas is then meant to accelerate that process. Now, how long will that take? All of our models are looking at a 24-month period. If everything works out well, looking at a 24-month period to retire the outstandings and also ensure a steady supply of funds going forward. The crude handling charge, what had happened over the last 3 years is you pay for what you call reserve production capacity, and all of that capacity has to do with your net crude oil and water that is associated with it when it comes to the terminal. Over a 3-year period, so Shell recalculated the actual volume versus the reserve production capacity that we had paid for, and the excess volume that had come in over that period, over and above the reserve capacity, was where they then calculated and slammed a one-time charge on us. So we simply have to increase our reserve production capacity, bearing in mind that our production actually has gone substantially up, actually higher than what the projection was 3 years ago. So It won't be an ongoing one-time charge that you'll be seeing. We'll just revise our reserve production capacity and make financial provision for it going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much.
The next question comes from Alex Topuzoglu from Exane BNP Paribas. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Morning all, and thanks for taking my questions. Just following up on Michael's point on the receivable, definitely good to see some progress on that. But when do you expect to have this JV loan in place? And also, are you, investing or pursuing other avenues to accelerate the repayment of the receivable? Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll take the first part, and Roger will clarify further. The underlying issue with the JV receivable is getting NPDC to dedicate sufficient volume of crude, not just towards meeting their obligation going forward, but retiring the arrears gradually. So all of the schemes we're putting in place, including even direct negotiations with us, with NPDC and its funding partner, is for NPDC one way or the other to dedicate a larger volume of crude from their own share towards meeting these obligations. That's really the core of what we're doing. That's what Roger is negotiating with the revolver, to have a dedicated volume put into that revolver. And so all of these discussions are ongoing. Roger will give you, I just wanted to give you, put it in context that all of the negotiations are aimed at, capturing a higher volume so that the arrears which accumulated because the volumes appropriated by NPDC were simply not enough to meet the cost, is to now get larger volumes to retire those areas. That's really the context in which all the negotiations are going.
Yeah, and just on the timing, we're just engaging now. Obviously, we just had this recently signed, so I would say that we expect to have it in place in Q4. The exact date and month, whatever, we're not going to get drawn into committing to, but we're in discussions at the minute.
Okay, so in the release when it says, we'd still expect a reduction in the balance of the receivable in H2. So ultimately, Q4 would be probably when it expects, but not into 2016. Should we say? Or
right?
Okay,
yeah, we're aiming to get it in place during Q4.
Okay, and you've talked a lot about efficiency on your current operations, and I mean, to me it seems unlikely that Pioneer tax status will be awarded to new blocks that anyone acquires in the Delta. Therefore, how active do you see yourselves being in the M&A market going forwards beyond this current discussion that you're having about that 453 million that was in escrow? And also, and on that, could you just briefly give an overview of the Nigerian M&A market right now? How many assets you're seeing on the market, how many discussions you're having with sellers, how much competition you're seeing for individual assets, and so on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me say that our M&A activities now and going forward will be guided by what additional assets, if any, do we require to contribute reserves, 2P reserves, that will deliver for us a certain threshold of sustainable oil and gas production profitably. So a lot more prudent on our M&A activities going forward. There might be the case that we'll put in some more energy in extracting full value out of the ones that we're currently engaged in. But our main focus is to deliver going forward a certain threshold of oil and gas production, at a level that delivers profit to our business. And therefore, our balance sheet, the strength and quality of our balance sheet will be the underpinning activity that will drive our M&A. So there could be M&A activities, but they have to fit into this context I've just described. They have to be such that they contribute in a profitable manner to our reserves accretion and our production guidance going forward. Otherwise, if they don't fit, they don't fit.
Okay, and so then just on, I realise that you haven't given much guidance on that asset that you're currently in discussions on, but is this something that you're likely to be operator of? Could you maybe quantify? You said this will all unravel in the next few weeks. Is this something that So you are clearly well progressed, but is there any in terms of quantum of potential outlay, maybe in terms of reserves, and is this probably the last asset acquisition we could see maybe till the end of this year? Is that something how we should think about it?
No, actually, it's part of the reason we decided, CFO decided to be in a safe position by holding his money while negotiations are on, so that we don't get dragged into these details at this point. We're in a safe negotiating position, and as soon as those are over, then you get the numbers you're looking for.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The following question comes from Lanray Ulura from Primera Africa. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning, and thank you for the call. Austin's been quite, you have your poker face on, so that's good. I'll probably move away from the M&A question. Back to the pioneer status. And you mentioned earlier that you will be applying for the gas as a standalone, or is this going to be an extension for what you have right now? And also, the NBDC receivables, and quite, progress being made. It's quite commendable. The question right now, is it more, there's a new sheriff in town, has that helped negotiations, better? And I'm talking more about the new president and the restructuring going on at the NNPC. Has that been a major driver? Because, from what we've seen here, this seems like a straightforward transaction that could have been done a while ago. I don't know why it took so long. And in regards to your potential lenders, are you looking locally or is it more international lending? I know the banks are quite squeezed right now, so it'll be interesting to see if they'll be looking at doing any transactions of this nature. All right, thank you.
Okay. Well, Roger will handle the lenders, but as I said, the context in which we're looking at this transaction is to dedicate a certain volume of crude. So it's he will give you more details. So it's not so much about going to the bank to borrow to reduce the receivables. It's really about dedicating a certain volume of crude on a monthly basis, which can then be translated to cash to reduce the receivables. The negotiations for reducing these receivables have been on, really. I mean, we've been working on this all of the time that we've had these problems. It's just that we put in a lot more efforts, and now we have these two options. One of them we have in hand, which is applying the gas revenues. Again, when you look at this, applying the gas revenues would not have been meaningful 2 years ago because there were hardly any gas revenues. So what happened was, in anticipation of these increased volumes and better pricing, we then started putting a lot of efforts into securing these gas revenues, knowing that they will become, they'll become substantial enough to make some difference. So that's why that took so long. On the oil side, we'll be working on different options, just coming to light now. So it's really not so much because it's a new kid on the block politically. Hopefully, even that will help the process move much faster. But what you're seeing are results of work that has been going on for the past 18 months and so on. On the Pioneer, what I said, we will apply for an extension because we think we qualify for that extension. I only just pointed out that even over and above that, the gas business and gas expenditure, the couple also on his own qualifies for it. So either way, we have options, is what is the point I'm making. But what are we applying for? We'll apply for an extension of 2 years because we think we qualify for it. So Roger will give more meat into the lenders question.
Yeah, look, we're looking at the liquidity where the liquidity is. So, and you're right that the local market has been impacted in dollar liquidity. We don't rule any market out. We don't look any liquidity source out. We're in discussions of that at the minute. But as Austin says, it's looking at forward volumes of oil. So we're not looking to go at this with a very elongated and complex process. We're looking at some JV loan backed on forward sales of oil.
Okay. A quick one, Austin. You can just give us some guidance. What's your take on, oil prices? I mean, you guys seem to be positioned, particularly the gas business, to cushion this fall in prices. But what's your outlook? I mean, you see any recovery in prices at all in the near future?
Well, we've been budgeting internally on $50 2015, $60 2016, and $70 flat for 2017. From our own planning and budgeting point of view, we have not changed that. But we'll keep looking at it and also pay attention to our hedging policy to minimize those risks going forward. But that's what we have been budgeting on since the beginning of the year.
Thank you.
The following question comes from Shola Labinjo from CPH. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hello, gents. Good morning. I had a few questions, or a couple of questions, actually. Austin, first, could you kindly provide me with an insight into the company's capital allocation process? I'm trying to understand how you rank all the opportunities you face, be it further M&A in the local market, making incremental investments on OML 53 and 55, or advancing gas development on 438 and 41, and using any sort of tax benefits that you have on those assets. And then the second was for Roger, as he thinks about negotiating GSAs with third parties and further M&A. So with NGC, I think that's not a government entity. So when you have a gas sales agreement with them, how are you comfortable with the counterparty risk on those agreements? And then the other was, when you think about OML 53 and 55 and further acquisitions, do you run into the same situation that you have today, whereby you build up another substantial receivables position because the government is your partner on those assets?
Very loaded question. Let me attempt to answer all the elements of the question. Our gas business, you pointed out some of the underlying risks. Do you want to underpin the entire future gas business on one off-taker that is a government agency, which is NGC? The answer is no. As Stuart pointed out in his presentation, the bulk of our commercial agreements with the NGC are short-term. They are stopgap arrangements to fill in the space between our final off-takers actually coming in Q1 2018. So we have two customers, secured payments that will come in Q1 2018. Between now and Q1 2018, what we have done is to come up with a flexible arrangement where those volumes we can trade with NGC today. And to be fair to NGC, they're not doing very badly on payments, but in spite of that, I agree with you that our entire gas business is not underpinned by just one customer. And even before 2018, a couple of other customers that are not NGC that will come in quite shortly and take some volume. So on the average, what we're looking at by the end of this year is a situation where we have NGC on 100 million scope and some flexible volumes above that. But the rest of the volumes will go to the customers that that have secured payment terms in the agreements. For that gas business, as I said, because it has been front-loaded in terms of Capex, going forward, the expansions that we're seeing in the next 2 years, 2-3 years, are not heavy Capex items, except the eventual development of 53 gas. The 53 gas is a complete animal of its own. It comes with its own volume of condensate. That whole development has to be such that on a standalone basis, it can fund itself. It can fund itself. That's the principle on which we develop it. But from the condensate production and from the gas volumes that we're going to go into the market from that. So we don't worry at this stage from Capex allocation from our balance sheet towards 53. That will be a self-funding mechanism on its own. For all the others, again, the CFO will give a throw more light, but the Capex allocations are such that we every dollar that we put in has to return, has to on its own be profitable, and that's really what guides us going forward. It's not just allocating Capex now to deliver volumes, But while looking at Capex, such that volumes that are delivered are done in a profitable manner. Now, a good question you asked about the other assets when they come in. Are we going to go through the same process of building up receivables? We'll start solving that problem very, very early in the day. For instance, as soon as some of those new assets come in, we'll start very, very early discussions on a modified carrier arrangement with government, whether it is NNPC, NAPIMS, or it is NPDC. We will be sure that mechanisms are in place to not accumulate receivables before we start spending any substantial capex in any of them. So a lot of lessons learned on this receivable deal. And really, everybody, just some of the things we're doing now, some of the things the big boys, Chevron, Total, and Shell are also doing to reduce these receivables. So really, it is a national issue. And ultimately, I also think that this new regime, as soon as they settle down, we have to try to provide a solution to the overall receivables. So we're talking over $6 billion owed to the industry. And everybody now understands that it's a major hindrance on further spend and further increase in production. So even at the national level, that problem has to be solved before government will expect any new capex coming into the oil and gas industry.
I think also you probably answered the question. What I'd say is just on the gas side of things, all those contracts have a credit enhancement in them. So they have things like that as a credit. They have other price protection in there in terms of indexes around that. So you do get a level of protection in those contracts, whether they be the shorter term contracts, the NGC, or the longer term contracts.
All right, thank you.
As the question and answer session is now over, I will hand the conference back to you, sir.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much for listening to us and for your very insightful questions. And we look forward to seeing you again in another 90 days or so. Thank you all very much. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. You may now disconnect your lines.